The rain had been falling for hours, a relentless torrent that turned the deck of the Elysium into a slippery, treacherous expanse. The ship, a once majestic cruise liner now repurposed for private charters, groaned under the weight of the storm. Its hull creaked like the bones of some ancient beast, and the wind howled through its corridors like a mournful spirit. 6 friends had boarded the Elysium 3 days ago, lured by the promise of a luxurious getaway. But now, as the storm raged on, the luxury had faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The ship's crew had vanished hours ago, leaving the friends to fend for themselves. No one could explain where they had gone or why the ship's engines had fallen silent. It started with the captain. Mark, the most adventurous of the group, had gone to the bridge to check on the crew. He returned pale and shaken, his clothes soaked from the rain. "They're gone," he said, his voice trembling. "All of them. The bridge is empty." The others laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of prank. But when they ventured out to investigate, they found the same eerie emptiness. The galley, the engine room, even the lifeboats, all deserted. The ship was adrift, carried by the currents of the storm. As night fell, the storm grew worse. The power flickered, plunging the ship into darkness before the emergency lights kicked in. The friends huddled in the dining hall, their laughter now replaced by nervous silence. The rain hammered against the windows, and the wind screamed like a banshee. It was then that they heard it, a faint knocking sound coming from somewhere deep within the ship. At first, they thought it was the storm, but the rhythm was too deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. "It's probably just something loose," said Sarah, trying to sound brave. But no one believed her. The next morning, the storm showed no signs of abating. The friends decided to search the ship again, hoping to find some clue about the crew's disappearance. They split into pairs, armed with flashlights and whatever weapons they could find. Mark and Sarah were the first to see it. As they made their way to the lower decks, they caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the rain on the stern deck. It was tall and gaunt, its silhouette blurred by the downpour. Before they could call out, it turned and vanished into the shadows. "Did you see that?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. Sarah nodded, her face pale. "We need to get back to the others." Back in the dining hall, the group compared notes. No one had found any trace of the crew, but they all agreed that something was wrong. The ship felt alive, as if it were watching them. It was then that they found the message. Scrawled on the wall of the engine room, in what looked like rust or blood, were the words, "The storm demands a sacrifice." No one admitted to writing it. No one could explain how it had gotten there. That night, the storm reached its peak. The ship rocked violently, and the friends clung to whatever they could to keep from being thrown across the room. The knocking sound returned, louder this time, and accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. One by one, the emergency lights went out, plunging the ship into darkness. The friends screamed for each other, their voices drowned out by the storm. And then, one of the screams cut off abruptly. When the lights flickered back on, Mark was gone. The remaining friends searched the ship frantically, calling Mark's name. But there was no sign of him. It was as if he had been swallowed by the storm. As they regrouped in the dining hall, Sarah noticed something on the table. It was a small, weathered book, its pages filled with strange symbols and diagrams. On the last page was a drawing of the Elysium, surrounded by swirling storm clouds. Beneath it were the words, "The storm demands a sacrifice." Sarah realized then what they had to do. The storm wasn't just a force of nature. It was alive, and it wanted something from them. If they didn't give it what it wanted, none of them would survive. The friends argued for hours, their fear and desperation growing with each passing moment. Finally, they agreed to draw lots. The loser would be the sacrifice, offering themselves to the storm in exchange for the other's safety. When the lot fell to Sarah, she didn't protest. She knew it was the only way. With tears in her eyes, she made her way to the stern deck, the others following at a distance. The storm seemed to calm as she stepped into the rain. The wind died down, and the rain fell softly around her. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. And then, the storm took her. The next morning, the storm was gone. The sun shone brightly, and the sea was calm. The friends stood on the deck, staring at the spot where Sarah had vanished. They knew they should feel relieved, but all they felt was emptiness. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Elysium began to move. The crew reappeared as if nothing had happened, their faces blank and unreadable. When the friends tried to ask what had happened, the crew simply smiled and said, "The storm has been satisfied." The friends never spoke of what happened on the Elysium. They went their separate ways, each haunted by the memory of the storm and the price they had paid to survive. But sometimes on quiet nights when the rain falls softly, they hear it, a faint knocking sound, coming from somewhere deep within their memories. And they know that the storm is still out there, waiting for its corridors like a mournful spirit. Story 2: The Whispering Waters. The town of Black Hollow had always been shrouded in mystery. Tucked away in a valley surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees, it was a place where the sun rarely touched the ground, and the air always carried a faint chill. The Blackwater River, which snaked through the heart of the town, was its lifeblood and its curse. For generations, the river had been a source of both sustenance and fear. The elders spoke of its origins in hushed tones, claiming it was born from the tears of a grieving god who had drowned the world in sorrow. They warned their children never to swim in its waters, never to linger too long on its banks, and never, ever, to listen to the whispers that sometimes rose from its depths. But the warnings were vague, and over time, they faded into folklore. The younger generations dismissed them as old wives' tales until the disappearances began. It started with Eli, the baker's son. He was a curious boy, always exploring, always asking questions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew dark, Eli wandered too close to the river. His parents later recounted how they had heard him laughing, as if someone were playing with him. When they called out, there was no response. By the time they reached the riverbank, Eli was gone. The only evidence of his presence was a single set of small footprints leading into the water, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper lingering in the air. The townsfolk searched for days, dragging the river with nets and hooks, but they found nothing. The water was unnaturally still, as if it were holding its breath, hiding its secrets. After Eli, others began to vanish. Old Man Grady, the town's fisherman, was next. He had spent his entire life on the river, but one morning, his boat was found adrift, empty. His fishing rod lay neatly on the seat, as if he had simply stepped away. But the river gave no answers. Then it was the Harper twins, two mischievous girls who had dared each other to swim in the black water on a moonless night. Their mother found their clothes folded neatly on the bank, but the girls were never seen again. Each disappearance was accompanied by the same eerie detail. Those who had been near the river spoke of hearing whispers. They described them as soft, almost musical, like a lullaby sung just out of earshot. The words were indistinct, but the tone was irresistible. A promise of something beautiful, something eternal. Sarah Collins was an outsider, a hydrologist sent to study the Blackwater River after reports of its strange properties reached the scientific community. She was skeptical of the town's superstitions, convinced there was a rational explanation for the disappearances. But the moment she arrived, she felt it, a subtle, almost magnetic pull toward the river. It was as if the water itself was calling to her, its whispers weaving through her thoughts like a song she couldn't quite place. She set up her equipment on the riverbank, determined to uncover the truth. But the deeper she delved, the more she began to notice strange anomalies. The water was impossibly dense, resisting her instruments as if it were alive. Its surface reflected nothing, not even the trees or the sky above. And at night, when the town was silent, the whispers grew louder. "Come closer," they seemed to say. "Just a little closer." One evening, as Sarah knelt by the river, she saw it. Her reflection stared back at her, but it was wrong. The eyes were too wide, the smile too sharp, the features twisted into something grotesque. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, but the reflection didn't move. It simply watched her, its grin widening. Then it spoke. "You've been searching for answers," it said, its voice a perfect mimicry of her own. "But you already know the truth. The river doesn't take. It frees." Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. The whispers surrounded her now, a chorus of voices urging her forward. She felt the cold water lapping at her boots, then her ankles, then her knees. "Just a little closer," the voices sang. "Just a little deeper." She fought against the pull, but it was too strong. The water closed over her head, and the world went silent. The depths below the surface, the river was alive. Sarah found herself in a vast, dark expanse, the water thick and heavy around her. She could breathe, but the air was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. Shapes moved in the shadows, human shapes, their faces twisted and broken, their eyes wide with terror. They reached for her, their mouths moving in silent screams, but no sound escaped. And then she saw it, the source of the whispers. It was a massive, pulsating mass, its form shifting and writhing like a nest of serpents. It had no face, no eyes, but she could feel its gaze on her, its hunger radiating through the water. "Welcome," it whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "You are home now." The disappearances continued, one by one, until Black Hollow was a ghost town. The houses stood empty, the streets silent, the forest reclaiming what had once been its own. But the river remained, its surface smooth and unbroken, its whispers drifting through the trees like a mournful song. And if you were to stand on its banks, if you were to listen closely, you might hear it too. A soft, seductive voice promising peace, comfort, an end to all pain. Come closer, it would say. Just a little closer. And you would, because the river doesn't take. It frees. Story 3. The Thirst of Hollow Creek. The village of Hollow Creek was a forgotten place, nestled deep within a valley surrounded by jagged hills and dense, gnarled forests. The villagers were hardy folk, their lives tied to the land and the animals they raised. Goats, sheep, and a few scrawny cows were their livelihood. But water, precious water, was always scarce. The creek that gave the village its name had dried up decades ago, leaving only a cracked, barren riverbed. The villagers relied on a single well, its water murky and bitter, but it was all they had. One summer, the drought worsened. The well began to run dry, and the animals grew weak. The villagers whispered of leaving, but where would they go? Hollow Creek was all they knew. Desperation hung heavy in the air, like the oppressive heat that refused to break. One evening, young Elira, a shepherd girl, ventured farther into the woods than usual, searching for a lost goat. The sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows, and the forest grew eerily quiet. As she pushed through a thicket, she stumbled upon something she had never seen before. A narrow stream, its water clear and glistening under the moonlight. It seemed impossible. Water hadn't flowed here in generations. Elira dropped to her knees and cupped the water in her hands. It was cold, unnaturally so, and had a faint metallic smell. She hesitated but drank anyway. The water was sweet, unlike anything she had ever tasted. Relief flooded her, and she ran back to the village, shouting the news. The villagers followed her to the stream, their faces lighting up with hope. They filled buckets, troughs, and barrels, rejoicing as their animals drank greedily. For days the stream flowed steadily, and the village began to thrive again. But soon, strange things started happening. The animals grew restless at night, their eyes glinting with an unnatural sheen. The goats' bleats turned guttural, almost like laughter, and the sheep huddled together, trembling as if sensing something unseen. The cows, once docile, became aggressive, their lowing echoing through the valley like mournful wails. Then came the dreams. Every villager who drank from the stream began to have the same nightmare. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, its form shifting and indistinct, beckoning them closer. In the dream, they would follow, drawn by an irresistible pull, only to wake up gasping, their throats dry and their bodies drenched in sweat. Elira was the first to notice the changes in the water. It no longer sparkled in the sunlight, but seemed to absorb the light, its surface oily and reflective, like a dark mirror. When she looked into it, she saw not her own reflection, but the face of the figure from her dreams, its hollow eyes staring back at her. One by one, the villagers began to disappear. Old man Gregor vanished first, his bed left empty, the sheets twisted as if he had struggled. Then Marta, the baker, was gone, leaving her oven still warm and a half-kneaded loaf on the table. Each disappearance was accompanied by a faint, metallic smell, like the water from the stream. Elira tried to warn the others, but they wouldn't listen. The stream was their salvation, they said. They couldn't give it up. But Elira knew the truth. The stream wasn't a gift. It was a lure, a trap set by something ancient and hungry. One night, unable to bear the nightmares any longer, Elira crept to the stream with a shovel. She dug frantically, trying to divert its flow, to stop it from reaching the village. As she worked, the water began to bubble and churn, and the figure from her dreams emerged, its form solidifying from the mist. It was tall and gaunt, its skin like cracked earth, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "You cannot stop it," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The water is life, and life is mine." Elira swung the shovel, but it passed through the figure, as if it were smoke. The creature laughed, a sound that echoed in her bones, and the stream surged, its waters rising like a tide. She turned and ran, but the water followed, flowing uphill, defying nature. The next morning, the village was silent. The animals were gone, the houses empty. Only the stream remained, its waters dark and still, reflecting the pale, lifeless sky. And deep within the forest, the figure waited, its hunger satisfied. For now, weeks passed, and the valley remained eerily quiet. Travelers who ventured near Hollow Creek spoke of an unnatural stillness, as if the very air had been sucked out of the place. The stream, once a lifeline, now seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its waters dark and viscous, like liquid shadow. Elira, the sole survivor, had fled to the nearest town, her mind fractured by the horrors she had witnessed. She tried to warn the townsfolk, but her ramblings were dismissed as the ravings of a mad girl. No one believed her tales of a cursed stream and a figure that drank the life from the land. But the curse of Hollow Creek was not content to remain confined to the valley. Slowly, insidiously, it began to spread. The first sign was a farmer's well on the outskirts of town. The water, once clear and sweet, turned dark and foul. His livestock grew restless, their eyes glinting with the same unnatural light that had plagued the animals of Hollow Creek. Then came the dreams, the disappearances. The townsfolk, desperate for answers, turned to an old hermit who lived in the hills. He was a man of few words, his face lined with age and wisdom. When they told him of the cursed water and the figure in the forest, his expression darkened. "You've awakened the thirst," he said, his voice heavy with dread. "It is an ancient entity, older than the hills themselves. It feeds on life, drawing its strength from the water and the souls of those who drink it. Once it has tasted a place, it will not stop until it has consumed everything." The townsfolk begged for a way to stop it, but the hermit shook his head. "The thirst cannot be destroyed, only contained. You must sever its connection to the water. But be warned, it will not give up its hold easily." Determined to save their town, a group of brave souls ventured to Hollow Creek, armed with shovels and torches. The valley was even more foreboding than they had imagined, the air thick with the stench of decay. The stream, now a black, oily ribbon, seemed to watch them as they approached. They worked tirelessly, digging trenches to divert the stream's flow and filling its source with rocks and dirt. But as they worked, the figure appeared, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It lashed out, its touch draining the life from those it touched, leaving behind withered husks. In the end, only one man remained. With the last of his strength, he lit a torch and threw it into the stream. The black water ignited, burning with a cold blue flame. The figure let out a shriek that echoed through the valley, its form dissolving into the mist. The stream dried up, and the thirst was silenced for a time. But as the man stumbled back to town, he couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still watching, waiting for the moment when the water would flow again and its hunger would return. And in the darkest corners of the forest, where the shadows gathered thickest, the thirst stirred, patient and eternal.